Welcome to a new Confluence podcast. I'm joined as usual with Evan Troxel, but I've got a friend of mine that's been a friend for a long time, Brent Seales, that's joining us. Brent is a professor at the University of Kentucky, a research professor, and we've probably known each other, Brent, 20, 25, 26, 27 years, probably late 90s that we got to know each other. The kind of background story that I always tell is that I was doing computer graphics work in the 90s. And, when you're in a place like Lexington, Kentucky, there's not that many people that even understand what you're talking about when you're working on those kinds of things. So we kind of became fast early friends through the university and connections over there about what we were doing on the graphics side. But, most recently, I've been watching Brent, like I said, all this time. And really, he's been working on a project that we're going to dig into today and talk about for the last 25 years that I now claim is like one of the sexiest, coolest projects that you could imagine on the planet, right? So it's a lot of fun. And we had one of Brent's colleagues, Christy, participating in our Confluence event this fall. You're not going to get away this fall. I'm going to have you come and visit the crew when everybody's in town. But welcome, Brent Seales.
Thanks so much. I can't wait.
So maybe we can kick this off. Just give us a little bit of your background, Brent, and then we'll dig into this cool, sexy project that I'm alluding to.
Sure. Yeah, I have been at the University of Kentucky for 30 plus years now, and it's my first and only academic appointment. Actually, I came from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a Ph.D. in computer science, specialty in computer vision, and I arrived in 1992 in Lexington, Kentucky. So I've held various roles at the university, including department chair for 2 terms. That would be 8 years. And I also ran a research center here, and I've been continuously doing research since I arrived in the 90s.
Great. So I will attempt to describe this grandiose project, and you can correct everything that I get wrong. But
well, let me hit you with this, Randall. Okay. See if you can do it. Yeah. One thing I love about this project is that you can say it in one sentence.
Good luck, Randall.
Just do it.
I don't know. That's a big challenge. So what Brent has been working on in general. I'll just kind of start from what I've seen you doing over the last 25 years. The idea was that you could take artifacts, historical artifacts that are, I'll just say rolled artifacts. So lots of times paper, parchment artifacts that end up, antiquities that become very brittle. You can't open these things. The theory that Brent had and has really worked on and I won't say perfected, but you've actually cracked the code on is to be able to scan these things with using CT scanners or X-ray type technologies and digitally unfold them based on the data that you recover from these CT scans. So everybody's probably seen CT scans when they think about the human body. Imagine being able to take rolled up scrolls of paper that are, and then running a CT scan on those, and then being able to digitally unfold those. So I kind of, got to watch this play out from afar, just, every year or two, kind of catching up with Brent about what they were doing over in the lab and how they was thinking about this. So he kind of perfected this technique of being able to do this, and then the real breakthrough. So the project or the kind of main project was to take these the Vesuvius scrolls from the Pompeii, where the volcano covered up hundreds or even thousands of these scrolls that were buried in a library that was Julius Caesar's father-in-law, I think, if I've got that correct. And so they've got these artifacts, and a few of them are in museums around the world, but they basically look like charcoal is the best way to describe it. I have other ways to describe it, but we'll say it's charcoal.
But keep it clean.
Yeah, but and they're so delicate, you can't unfold them, you can't unwrap them. So they've been able to now, scan these things, and now with the help of AI, actually taking the output of that as they get this data and using these techniques to basically read what's inside of them. So I don't, that
was a long sentence, Randall. That was
It is.
but you did it. I'm going to say
it is
victory.
and it works. It is like amazing. It is literally one of the most amazing things once you start going. And now Brent's kind of world famous. He's on 60 Minutes. He's being interviewed in all the famous things around the world. You can literally go out now and just go YouTube, search for Brent Seales, Vesuvius Project and Scrolls Project, and you'll see all kinds of videos. They're making a documentary that he's filming. He's the coolest cat in town now. So, but anyway, let's.
I want to hear Brent's. I want to hear Brent's sentence.
My sentence.
Let's go, Brent. Tell us how this. Like, when did the first idea for this pop into your head?
Well, we invented the technology before we really knew what the material should be, because I'm a tech geek, right? And we were starting on just doing digital restorations of opened pages, things that aren't flat, but you have to photograph them without making them flat. So can you fix it in post, right? Like a filmmaker would do. And it turns out there's a lot you can fix in post. We were worried that there were going to be things, in the internet age that wouldn't make it into the digital library because they are too hard to digitize. So, we were doing flattening, and then that evolved into complete unwrapping. And, I thought about it at the time more like a party trick. When we were kids, you crumple up pieces of paper from your notebook and you create a little ball, right? And then you open it and you do that again, and it creates a kind of fabric, right, out of the paper. So that was a fun thing to do as kids. In the end, we imagined, okay, you have a crumpled up piece of newspaper. Would it be possible to put that in a scanner and build a representation of it so that you could still read what was there, even though it's all crumpled up? And we built a prototype, so the technology actually evolved really quickly.
I'm just laughing. I'm laughing because it's like, the paper's crumpled up, but it's also been set on fire, and like where you ultimately ended up with this project and with this technology. But
it's like, let's just make it more complicated. Let's set it on fire.
It's just like when you actually wrap your head around where this eventually got to, it's absolutely insane.
Well, when we finally discovered what some of the iconic artifacts are, that is what the Herculaneum Scrolls, are. They are pieces of papyrus wrapped up and crumpled and then set on fire and then, baked for 1,800 years, I mean, crazy, right?
Crazy.
Didn't even know they existed when we started the work. But my one sentence would be, when I finally met that material and I walked into the library and I saw that collection, I mean, the magic happened, because I looked at it and I'm like, this is the easiest project in the world to describe to a layperson, which isn't always true when you do technology, right? And the description is, I want to find a way to read what's inside that scroll, right? Without opening it. And that's it. It gets more involved when you say how you're going to do that, but, the ultimate goal is just really easy to say, right?
Right. Well, it's gotten a lot of prominence the last couple of years, just because I'll let you describe, how that all came about. But there was an official challenge. There was some money that was put up, and then with the new advances in AI, using those techniques now to kind of decipher the data is actually now proving out that it's working. But to me, because I was able to kind of see this from afar, Brent, it's the classic 25-year overnight success story. It's like all these little incremental things that were built up, and I think when we had Christy on from your team talking about this, just the testament to, not being told that something's not possible, right? It's that fortitude, really, because if you knew how long it was going to take, you probably would never. It's one of those falls into those camps that I would just not bang my head against the wall from so many challenges along the way. But kudos to you to keeping this moving, and I'm sure a lot of students over the years that were in and out of your lab, contributed to this ability to get here. So, maybe you can. I don't know. Do you want to describe maybe what happened around the pandemic time and the way that the meeting Nat and how that challenge came about?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we've made systematic progress, for 2 decades, and a lot of the things that were roadblocks were not technical. They were things that had to do with rivals or access or lack of funding, momentary lack of funding. There were some roadblocks that involved inability to meet a technical challenge where we had to go back to the drawing board and figure out, okay, what do we do now? So, for example, the scans we were using weren't high enough resolution. And because it wasn't a typical camera, right, we were doing tomography at a high energy physics place, It wasn't really directly obvious how to get the resolution we needed because there were some barriers there, but we figured it out. During the COVID period, we had just finished acquiring what proved to be the golden scans of 2 scrolls, and we had them in 2019, actually. And so you might be thinking, well, if you had them in 2019, why did it take you until 2023, to crack that open and break through? COVID was one of the reasons. And another reason was that we needed AI to be able to improve the very weak signal inside that scroll that represented the evidence of the ink. And we were systematically working in that direction and had a bead on exactly how it worked. In fact, we published a paper in 2019 that was the recipe, right? But, it's hard work, and it was slow going, and COVID slowed us down. And also, we had a small team. And, when you start wading through the data inside a scroll that's been scanned at an 8-micron resolution, which is the size of a red blood cell. Okay, that's how small that is. That's a lot of work. That's just a lot of grunt work that's spade work that we knew we could accelerate, and that's where Nat came in. Yeah.
So, and can you just describe real quick, Brent, like this, you're scanning this really, 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 really tiny thing, but I think Christy mentioned it's like this 3-dimensional, it's a 3D pixel, a voxel kind of a thing, where it's locating changes in material or an application of ink or, whatever that ink is made out of on top of the papyrus in 3D space, which you then unfold. And maybe you can just get a little nerdy here for a second and describe exactly what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, we named our toolkit the volume cartographer, because what it allows you to do is map every 3-dimensional point through the thickness of something, not just on the exterior. That's what tomography gives you is an estimate at every point all the way through something of what its density is. And that comes from the X-ray. And most people are familiar with that from having medical, attention, because you can see your insides non-invasively when you do these CT scans at the doctor, and we're basically leveraging the same technology, but what we're seeing is the internal structure of the scroll, every layer all the way through the thickness of the scroll, right, without having to open up those layers.
Nice. So maybe let's pick up with, you mentioned Nat Friedman. I think if I've got this right, he was the founder of GitHub. So if people are used to the code repository GitHub, that company was sold to Microsoft. He's on the Microsoft team. He's become independently wealthy, beyond belief. Hits one of those kinds of home runs, and maybe pick up. I think he reached out and contacted you. Maybe you can kind of pick up there on the story.
Yeah, so I don't know Nat's resume perfectly, but I think actually Microsoft acquired a different company that he had founded, and then he became a Microsoft executive, and then he advocated for acquiring GitHub, which they did, and then he became the CEO. Got it. Which is just incredible. So when he sent me an email, I didn't think it was probably real, because I get a lot of email from people who claim to be this and that, and it's not that. It really was him. He cold called me. He reached out to me and said, I'm having a conference and I think it would be great for you to come out. Maybe we can help you raise some money. Maybe we can find interested partners. And so I did. I went out and joined him for one of his Silicon Valley weekend conferences. It was an unconference, which meant that when we got there, we all kind of self-organized, and I got to give a talk. It was fantastic. And, a number of times he said to me, maybe we can kick a few rocks and start an avalanche, right? Because he knew that we were pretty far advanced in what we were doing and had seen some of our work online. So, Nat was very well prepared in true CEO style, knew everything about what we'd done. What I didn't expect, though, was for him to pitch me, because I was going out there to pitch him, right? He was the one with all the connections and the money and everything else. And he turned it around, which I love, it's a great story. And he pitched me on the idea of doing a contest, which I hadn't thought of. And I wouldn't have known how to do it by myself anyway, but in partnership with Nat, we launched this crazy idea of forming the Vesuvius Challenge and seeing if we could accelerate to the punch, the place that we were already standing, basically kick the rocks, start the avalanche. And that is exactly what happened.
So the idea was to raise some money, put up rewards for being able to advance the technology. And, I think, we've talked about this, but to your credit, the idea of this, your baby that you'd worked on for all these years, the idea that you were going to now kind of expose that, the data, and let other people kind of open, it's an open source, maybe because he was running GitHub and involved in all that he's always thinking that way. But, this idea that there is this open source of all this data, I think it's, a testament to you. And we've talked about this a little bit about, that's the fear point, is all this stuff that I've worked on, am I going to now put it out there? But, magic happens. It sounds like, when you took that next step. So maybe you can give us more.
Yeah. I think CEOs maybe, and, you, Randall, you're an entrepreneur. I don't know about you, Evan, what your various incarnations in life have been like. But I think CEO types and founder types are pretty used to the idea that you can't hold on to everything. You have to build a company, which is a group of people, not just you, right? Professors, not so much. I mean, we are not ingrained with this idea that we gift the world, with our thing or build a company. Everything is pretty tightly held. So he pitched me, and I had to come back to my team and kick the idea around quite a bit. Because yes, we had invested a ton in collecting data that no one in the world had, and we firmly believed it was the golden data, that inside that data we would be reading a book from the ancient world. And if I had held on to that and said, this is going to be just for me, for us, I think I probably would have gotten there, but it would have taken a lot longer. And you know what? The impact in being able to walk alongside all these other people would never have happened. And I mean, we can talk about that, but Nat and Daniel Gross alone, the impact of being able to meet them and being able to get to know them and being able to be astounded by the fact that they didn't just raise money, Randall, they actually put up their own money. And a lot more of it than I make in a year. Yep. They brought to the project of their own money and said, we believe in this so much that we're going to be the first donors, right? I mean, I just love that about them, that they did that. It secured for me, a real confidence that we were going to be partners, right? That instead of me just being sort of acquired, right? And I needed that confidence because it was a big step and it wasn't part of my thinking until I met them.
Yeah. So how much money, describe the challenge and how that was structured. How much money did you raise? And
I think we launched with $250,000, and that was mainly money from Nat and Daniel. And Nat had said, we're going to launch and we're going to see if we can keep raising money because we can run the contest and pay for the prizes. But by raising money, we can also go ahead and hire people. And what happened is that within a week that doubled, and then within another week it doubled again. So we were over $1 million in prize pool. And that launched the competition because $1 million prize, right, is much more fancy, right?
Sounds good.
Than a quarter of $1 million.
Right.
And also it just started to build this community of other people besides just Nat and Daniel who started to believe and root for us to succeed. And, some people, there's a website somewhere where people put odds on various things, and they trade fake currency by betting, I don't remember the name of it, but we were tracking that, and there were a lot of people who were like, oh, this is 30%, they're going to make it, otherwise no way. And I was always a 100% believer, but it generated a lot of attention once we got over $1 million, right? And then what it was really about is structuring the competition so that the funnel, right, didn't lose all the people. And in the end, we actually had viable competitors. And, Nat was really brilliant at doing that. And I'm sure you probably talked to Christy about some of that because she's actually doing thesis work, right, in understanding the community that formed in the Discord channel around the contest and the goals that we had.
So how many people, would you estimate that got, actively started working on it or testing theories in code? Thousands?
Well, we started the competition with a first phase that was a Kaggle competition. So we partnered with Kaggle, and it was sort of phase one, and we had over 1,000 teams in the Kaggle competition. So that was a pretty good start. And then we started to monitor the Discord channel and saw, regularly 200 or 300 people active on the Discord channel, monitoring what's going on or contributing to a conversation. In the end, I am not sure exactly how many people worldwide, dipped their toe in the water. We had 20 or so submissions for the final grand prize from the first year's competition, and many of those were viable. So that was pretty good, and that was a $700,000 prize.
Yeah, nothing.
That's a good chunk of change.
And the young man who first, I guess, was able to read the first words out of it, he was a Nebraska boy, if I remember right.
That's right. Yeah, we had a competitor who was basically an undergraduate at the University of Nebraska. His name's Luke Ferrator. And he submitted for the first letters prize, first words prize, and he won that back in October 2023. And the word that his AI identified from a section of the scroll, from deep within the scroll, was the word purple in Greek. A really interesting, kind of rich piece of vocabulary that you would hope would be the first word, right? We got made fun of a little bit because why is everybody jumping up and down that you found one word inside a burnt scroll? But what we knew was that it was opening up, right? The whole thing technically was working soup to nuts all the way through. And that the first word was just that. It was the first word, but what we were going to get were many, many columns of a book from antiquity that no one's ever read, right?
And then he was part of the team, then a couple of others that decoded paragraphs or several pages. Is that?
Well, Luke won the first letters prize, but he stayed with the competition, which a few months later, included the grand prize. And what happened is that Luke teamed up with a couple of the other competitors strategically, because I think originally Luke was working by himself and he made it to first letters by himself. But I think strategically they realized collaboration would probably get them closer to winning the grand prize than fighting against each other. And so they made an agreement about how they would split the prize. And then Yusef and Luke and Julian were the three who teamed up and ultimately won the grand prize.
Yeah. And it was like, 3,000 characters, like multiple or several thousand?
Yeah. We had asked as the grand prize threshold to find 4 separate passages, was it 4? Of about 128 letters with no mistakes. Basically affirmable by someone who knows the ancient language. And they did it. I mean, they met the threshold. And we thought that was way out there, Based on all of my work, we were working with fragments that were open because the open fragments gave us kind of the treasure map for how to detect the ink with AI, right? You know from photographs where the ink is. And so you can align that with the tomography over here, and then you can learn the ink. And that's an easier problem, right, than diving in to the center of the scroll where you have no reference and just trying to find the ink, right? But they met the threshold, and we were able to award the grand prize, which was fantastic.
So maybe you can describe, Brent, where does AI come in on this? And, from what you've told me and I've read, the ink is not perceivable by the human eye. You can't even tell. So, and then in the scans even, it was very difficult to see with the human eye any perceivable difference. So how did AI come to play on this?
Yeah, a couple things about that. The examples we had that were fragments with visible ink on the top layer, we were using those as control experiments in the lab. We had real trouble seeing where the ink was in the X-ray, even though we knew it was there. And yet we could train the AI to learn to enhance where the ink was correctly, even though the evidence of it to our naked eye wasn't there. I always had this theory that the ink on the exposed layers, because they've been hundreds of years, open, was probably weaker than the ink that we would find inside the scroll, but I had no evidence to really back that up. But what happened with the competitors was that we had, 1,000 people hammering away on this problem, and we had virtually unwrapped brute force with, our volume cartographer tool. We had brute force unwrapped a bunch of surface area from inside. But again, most of that surface area, it didn't have ink that was visible to the naked eye. One of the competitors, though, very, very carefully observed hundreds of square inches of opened surface area and was able to detect evidence of the ink. It looked a lot like a crackle in a mud puddle that's dried up, So, the puddle, let's say, is on concrete. So you have concrete as one texture. And then the mud creates another texture with some cracks in it, right? So when you look at that, you say, okay, that's mud and it's different from the pavement. That's what they were seeing on the surface of the papyrus. The papyrus has fibers that run in two directions, crosshatched. And then on that crosshatch pattern, they were seeing this pattern that looked like crackled mud. And it turned out that was evidence of the ink. And the part that they were able to detect with the naked eye gave them a foothold to successively train the AI detector to get better and better at seeing the ink. And so then it was just a race. Wow. It was just a race. And so Luke was on the front end of that race with the word purple. Wow. And then there was an acceleration to the finish line. Who could get the best AI to amplify that evidence and see the ink more clearly?
So the work that they were doing on the AI side, ultimately you're trained, my novice understanding is you need inputs. You need a lot. Normally, you need a lot of input in order to train a model to have enough data points. It sounds like in this example, there's very little data or very limited data. How can you describe how they?
Well, yeah. So our initial approach before we started the contest that we believed would bear fruit because it was working in the lab was to use inputs that were just very, very small subregions. Let's say 8 by 8 region of voxels from the scan. So you take the center 9 by 9, 5 by 5, you take the center voxel and then some subregion around it. And it's very, very small, just a tiny point. And then you map that to just a yes or no label that says this is ink or this is not ink. And we did that mapping because we had a photograph of the top layer where we knew where the ink was. And having done that mapping, we were able to train up a system that reliably, with an n-fold kind of experiment, would detect the ink and would generalize. But it wasn't very good. It was hard to see that it was readable. So we made that our first Kaggle contest, actually. But to answer your question, Randall, the reason why we had lots of labels is because those regions were really small. So if I have an image that's got 16 million pixels in it, right, and I have only an 8x8 window, right? Then you're going to have a bunch of, a million labels in the single image, right? Just by taking that region and mapping it all over the surface.
Yeah.
Still, not at scale like we are now, but for the time, we still had enough examples of the ink and the no ink that we were able to get this system to work.
So Brent, with the challenge and the prize money, is the goal that as people make these discoveries, they have to teach and or expose the tools that they've written? Like, how is this going to progress and make this more widely available?
Yeah, Nat and the folks that he hired to run the challenge were really masterful in the way that they created an open environment, even though it was competitive. One of the things that they wanted to do was level everyone up every time a prize was given. So the terms of receiving the prize, terms required open sourcing tools. So did a lot of progress prizes where we rewarded people for, building sort of the next tool that just helped you do something a little bit more efficiently. So then all the competitors get that. And so then it kind of creates this community of people who are still competing with each other, right? But they're also being rewarded along the way in these sub-races, right? With, not trivial amounts of money, 10K, 20K, right? For something that might have taken a few weeks, but really removes a pain point. And again, this is something that's so hard to replicate with a regular research group in the university. Like, how do you really inspire that kind of, focus? I can't give people here a cup of coffee, right? Like from the university, I have to pay it out of my own pocket because, we're a public institution. There's no such thing as a spot bonus or a prize. And yet, with the competition, we were able to do exactly that. And we could get sort of pinpoint results that also created an incredible community. And, Nat thought that up with the help of JP Posma and Daniel Javier, who were guys that Nat, through his huge network of folks he was able to hire to help him basically launch. And then ultimately my PhD student, Stephen Parsons, became a part of Nat's team, and he works to this day with that group. I think it's been a really fruitful sort of postdoctoral experience for Stephen.
So maybe Brent, talk about, this is literally probably two worlds colliding, technologists with people in the humanities and historians. And one, how has the work been perceived, on that side? And then you kind of hinted at earlier, one of the challenges is just getting access to these antiquities. Are probably closely held for good reason. A lot of times, I think Christy talked about them when we had her on too. But maybe you can talk about, are these two worlds are colliding? Is it good, bad, moving things along faster?
Well, it's definitely accelerating. It isn't trouble-free because there are collisions. I think generally, though, the colliding worlds are moving in the right direction. Papyrologists and humanities scholars are becoming more collaborative and also more accepting of the value of things like AI to really tremendously open up their fields. We're talking about books that are new from the ancient world, which is something that hasn't happened for 50 or 100 years in the field of papyrology. You just don't have whole books being discovered anymore. But typically humanities scholars and papyrologists, they don't work together, right? The way they work is at a pretty slow pace individually. And then they reveal or publish their stuff, and then they argue about it. And then they publish something else and keep the arguments going. And I don't mean argument in a nasty way, but it's academic argument, right? To try to ultimately converge on the truth of whatever is being debated, right? Technology folks are different. They want things to be pretty quickly happening. Open source, revisions. AI is fundamentally iterative. So you don't create an image that is definitive, but you create an image that's on an optimization pathway toward a better image, right? And that drives humanities scholars nuts because they want to have something that's not moving, it's fixed, and then debate it and, understand it and edit it. Those are some of the pain points. But ultimately, I think the biggest thing that's helped me is that I've approached the problem as one of not technical virtuosity, although that's there, but scholarship. Like, the goal is to enable scholars who know the languages to understand and do scholarship, not to be gaga about the technology. And I think that more than anything has just helped those scholars realize, hey, they're trying to help us here, to unlock a library that's never been unlocked and let us do the scholarly analysis of that. Other of my competitors didn't take so generous a view, I would say, in that they just wanted to focus on their own invention of the technology and have that sort of be the end of the conversation. And I think that you miss something, right? If you focus only on what the tech can do for the tech's sake, right?
So, like with the Vesuvius scrolls, one, how many are there, and where are they, and is there going to be a foreseeable pipeline of starting to try to get these things scanned? And
yeah, there are a couple things there that we're trying to do. The first, to answer your question, how many? There were probably about 1,200 books in the original cache, excavated in 1750, 52. And the reason why the number is uncertain is because over time, some were destroyed, many were experimented on, a bunch were opened, and they created fragments. And so now it becomes much more difficult to count. It's like giving a toddler a bag of cookies and then at the end trying to count the pieces. How many cookies were there? It's like, who knows? Yeah, and we can count large chunks now in the on the order of 300 or 400, fairly sizable chunks. And experts are saying that maybe that represents a couple hundred books, maybe 150 books, certainly more than 100 books. Each one unknown and unique from the ancient world, probably not a copy of anything. This archive has proved, for the most part, to be unique books. So that's really cool. As far as our ability to access them, we still have a great relationship with the library, and they are allowing us to scan a batch of 20 coming up in March. So that will be huge news because this, we're going to be escalating in sort of orders of magnitude. So from 2 to 20, right? And then we hope next year to 200. And by doing that, of course, the AI is going to improve because we will see more papyrus. We'll see more geometric configurations of what these things look like. And, we'll also just generate, it's going to change the field. I mean, Randall, we're really on the edge of bringing from the classical period more new material to the scholarly world than has happened in 500 years. I mean, the last time was the Renaissance when people like, Bracciolini, who is the subject of this book, The Swerve, right, found books by Lucretius and, and other authors in libraries around medieval Europe in the early Italian Renaissance. It's been since then, right, that we've had such a large cache and trove of potential material from the ancient world. So, how often do we get to stand on this threshold of, something like that? I think it's pretty exciting.
It's very cool. I think I probably told a little bit of this story when Christy was on, but the whole Confluence event that we put on was literally me having coffee or lunch with Brent one day in 2019 up at the university, and I'd sent him a note and was like, I need to get up. I'm looking for somebody who can help us think about what's going on with AI and how we might apply it, in our business. So I go up. Brent was kind enough to join me for coffee, and we just had one of the normal kind of conversations, interesting conversations. And I remember walking back to the office, walking back downtown from the university, and I'm like, I'm going to have an event where I'm going to bring all my friends from the architecture and design world, and I'm going to mix them up with Brent's friends because he knows all these great people. Brent's a Google fellow. He's like connected with all of these famous scientists doing all this. I'm like, and I'm going to call it Confluence. We're going to bring these people together and once a year, talk about some of this kind of stuff. So I'll have to give Brent credit for kind of the impetus to get this. Really, it was these worlds. Thus the name. That's why we ended up calling it Confluence. But it's like, can we bring together people from even outside of the architecture and engineering world that are working on things and be inspired about how this either could apply or to bring these technologies to bear on the kinds of things that we're trying to work on inside of our industry. So just lots of, and actually the first year, I am going to get you to join us this year, Brent, because you've put me off twice. I've had the first year, James from your team joined us at the first Confluence and gave a little overview. This was back in 2019 about what you all were doing, and had a great experience. James, I think, enjoyed it too. And I think he came back the next year and joined us even though he wasn't given a talk. And then this past year, Christy from your team gave a great talk that everybody really enjoyed. So at some point we're going to get you.
There are probably no talks left for me to give. Oh, everybody's given those talks already.
No. It's just, it's like I said, it's like one of those perfect projects where I think it's just that combination of technology and humanities and, kind of bringing all that stuff together. It has a lot of romanticism to it. And, and also now opens up, I think, kind of all these thoughts about, well, what else? Like is there any, do they think that there are more of these scrolls that just haven't even been discovered, that were buried, by the volcanic ash that still?
If you look at the archaeological site of the Villa of the Papyri, which is actually in the town of Herculaneum, it's around the coast from where Pompeii is, a different town, but nearby. Yeah. If you look at that site, you'll see the original tunnels that were dug in 1752. Very little extra excavation, with some exceptions, but not that much has been done. So yeah, it's entirely possible that to the left or the right of any of those tunnels by 1 foot is a case full of scrolls laying there waiting to be discovered. We feel like we've taken one of the big reasons why they're not going to do that off the table. And so it might be possible in the next iteration, after we've read these 400 scrolls, to start excavation. Yeah. And I don't know why we would not want to fully excavate the villa. It's the only library from antiquity that's ever been discovered in situ. And, I mentioned the 500-year high of reading what we have. If we discovered more material in the library through archaeology, it would be the biggest discovery in human history from the classical period. So,
incredible.
One of the things you mentioned, Brent, was like when you set out those challenges early on, you said you thought you set the goal pretty far out, and then obviously surpassed kind of your wildest dreams about what was possible within such a short amount of time. Part of that is, bringing in people and them teaming and this open source kind of incentivization of how this all works, and then there's the tech and how fast the tech is moving. And I'm just curious, maybe you could paint a picture for us, because I think it starts to speak to the way we look at tools in different industries, but how we should maybe look at them similarly, which is like, whoa, this is moving way faster than anybody thought was possible. And I'm just curious, maybe it sounds to me like it's the backbone of your research and your process now, and maybe it always was. I know you started in computer vision, but this AI thing has really made computer vision on steroids, right? It's just done that to it, and it's kind of doing that to everything. And so, there's a lot of people in a lot of industries, not just architecture and not just academia, who are kind of sitting on the sidelines watching this happen, saying, I'm just going to sit over here and watch. And then there's teams like you who have definitely benefited from this incredible acceleration. Could you just talk about that and like how your eyes have opened or how your perspective has shifted in this, last 6 years of doing this?
Well, yeah, it really has accelerated, and also AI in the way it works has turned engineering a little bit on its head, where you can solve problems without necessarily understanding all of the reasons why it's being solved, which is kind of weird to say. But people ask me, what is the AI actually seeing in the data that it's using to detect the difference between ink and not ink? And the correct answer has to be, we're not exactly sure. Here are the things that are possible. Maybe the fibers get coated with ink, and that makes a different pattern. Maybe it's a little thicker there. Maybe there's a texture that's different. But at the end of the day, who cares, right? We're solving the problem of enhancing the ink. We're doing it reliably. And industry-wide, we're seeing a lot of who cares, this works, so just use it. Mm-hmm. We don't necessarily need to tease out all the things that are happening that make it work. Mm. And that was never how computer vision worked in the past. We had to decompose everything into the pieces, parts, and then put it together and sort of understand every step, right? Mm. And then kick the tires on the weaknesses of each step and try to ablate what was the weakest part, make that better. That was basically how it worked. And it's not really true anymore. And that's a huge shift in problem solving and is part of the acceleration. Stop trying to understand everything. Just it's like, don't try to figure out how the piano works. Just play the piano. Yeah. It's beautiful, right?
Right.
So
that opens up another question as far as like tools. I mean, you talked about like who cares what tools you're talking about the antiquities side, but people who are in the humanities, and it's like, well, this is a tool. And it's kind of like that too. Who cares? Like it's amazing that what it does, right, is magic, and it's helping us do what we do better and push our field forward. And I just want to emphasize that, like, I mean, in architecture, it's kind of the same with clients. Like they don't care what tools we use, but there's a lot of excitement, especially in Randall's in my circle, about the tools themselves. But it's not why we do what we do. And I think that that's kind of true for architects, right? It's like we don't do it so that we can use these tools or so that we can evangelize these tools or so that it's not about that. It's about solving these bigger problems in culture and society and humans and the way they interact with space and what it can do for people and how it can make them potentially better citizens because they have better spaces to live in and work in and things like that. So like not just pursuing tech for tech's sake, right? It's like, what is the big picture? Let's step back. And I just think this is a kind of a brilliant reminder of that. It's like, these are the things that are coming alongside, and as humans, we're using for leverage, which is what we do with tools. It could be a digital tool, it could be an analog tool, right? But the why is the big picture, and I think that's what's such an important message. Even when Randall asked the question about how is it benefiting these other, and how is that relationship going. That's just kind of a good thing to step back and really take stock of, because that is super important, is to remember why this is happening in the first place, and these tools come along and help make it happen.
I agree with that, and I think one of the things that seems so magical about this moment is the humanities side. It's that these tools are so human, and they're whereas in the past, they weren't so mysterious. Because it seemed kind of obvious you can build a backhoe and it can move earth, right? That's not really a human thing. But, when we can build a keyhole back in history 2,000 years, or we can summarize a corpus of enormous mountains of material and with pinpoint accuracy ask a tool to give us a summary of that 5 different ways and in 5 different styles, that always seemed like that would be beyond the grasp of anything that we could invent.
Right.
That would require a human, right? And so I actually think that I'm in this space, which is going to be the future of this whole enterprise, which is the confluence of humanities and AI.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's where it's at.
So maybe it's
also
go for it,
Randall.
No, go ahead, Evan.
Okay, so one last question is you've gone through this process over the last few years. You met Nat. You've had these incredible people come along because of these challenges and prize money, but also just kind of the challenge of figuring it out, right? And you mentioned earlier that like this isn't traditionally how academia has worked, right? And you talk about kind of the silo protectionism that happens over your research, your findings, your tools, your processes, all those things. And so like you mentioned, like you didn't know there was another way necessarily, but I think entrepreneurs and technologists and specifically are pretty much like this is how they work, right? And so they took their thing and applied it to this. I'm curious if it has actually changed anything about how you go about problem solving, or maybe how you envision how it could be, and what you would change if you could. I know like that we have these organizations and these institutions that are really not easy to change, right? So I don't even know if it's possible, but I'm curious, like, has this inspired you to kind of rethink the way you could or wish you could kind of move around these kinds of subjects in the future, or and obviously enable others to do also?
Well, it has. It's been eye-opening for me to know there is this other way that can work. I don't think it's it's a panacea. I think that we kicked the rocks and started an avalanche because we had carefully set up the scaffolding through conventional research that was systematic.
It led to that.
And convinced us that we were ready.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it has changed my mind about those points when you are ready. There are these other options besides just, digging in the same old way to try to do the same old thing on a task that, maybe is oversized or for which we're ill-equipped. And I think that's the power of collaboration, right? It was Nat kind of flipping the script, pitching me, and then me being, brave enough and not too stupid to recognize the upside was probably going to be way bigger than the downside. I mean, there has been downside, I'm human. And so, sometimes I think I'm missing out on a piece of glory, but the minute that I start thinking that way, I look at what's happening and I'm like, yeah, that's silly thinking. I mean, look at the upside to what's going on, right?
How hard was it for him to convince you in the beginning? I know, and it wasn't just you, right? Like you had to basically present this to your team, and I'm sure there were a lot of objections, but like how big of a job was that for him to come along and convince you and your team?
He didn't have to do a lot of arguing. I mean, we laid out what was possible. I think that the convincing that had to take place was me making sure I was going to do right by my team because it wasn't just a decision for me. And so I had to make sure that was true. And then me deciding whether I could really trust Nat. Because the foundation of collaboration is trust. And I've been in some collaborations where the collaborations broke down because people did things that were bad or that you didn't expect or that didn't consider other people. And I had to get to the point where I could trust Nat.
Was there any, I don't think I've asked you, Brent, was there any challenges with the university as far as intellectual property or what had been done under the university umbrella versus opening that up then for the world?
Well, I got pretty good advice that was to just keep everything outside the university because that would have added an extra layer of difficulty for me to have to cut through. And I said before that the long timeline on some of this work had to do with more than just the technical. That's an example where I bring this back to the university, it goes to legal, then they decide, do we want to experience any kind of risk for this? And then they go back and forth and it's out of my control and I don't know what's going to happen and it takes time and so forth, right? So rather than doing that and rather than having to sort of start up my own company and sever my relationship, we just went ahead and kicked it to Nat. He ran with it. And he gave me an affiliation as co-founder and that's worked great. And the fact that we have a strong trust in each other that, we're not going to go off and do things that are silly or unexpected, it works.
Yeah. So maybe we can turn to earlier this year. It was announced that you are now going to lead an AI and Humanities Institute, I think. it's officially called, that is funded by Eric Schmidt, who was the former CEO of Google, and his wife have a foundation. Maybe you can tell us more about that.
Yeah, Eric and Wendy Schmidt have a philanthropic foundation called Schmidt Sciences, and through that mechanism, they very, very generously have set up an endowment that allows funding across a lot of different science endeavors. And one big institute that they've set up is the AI and Advanced Computation Institute, around which the program I'm going to run is fit. So they are very interested, both Eric and Wendy, in how AI is going to be shaping our future. And so one of their signature programs is called AI 2050, and it's trying to envision what AI will do to change the world between now and the year 2050. And you can think about it as a similar program to the MacArthur Fellow Program, where they fund young scientists who are making a huge impact so that those folks with very few strings attached can use those resources to move the needle to change the world. I think it's an incredible program. The Humanities and AI Virtual Institute, we call it HAVI, which is going to fund projects at the confluence of, I keep using that word, Randall, forget about it.
It's a good word.
At the intersection, right, of humanities and AI, is, I think, the future. I think moving humanities scholars more toward the center of the magic of AI, right, so that we can really understand how deeply human these things are becoming, and how we can leverage the way they're working, understand better how to make them better. I think that's where it's at. And so there's going to be a lot of work, probably a lot of interest in my portfolio in things like large language models, multimodal AI, and new AI techniques that try to grasp significant humanities collections, and collections that are unusual, that you're not going to see from a sensor, for example, but that are still really interesting and can sort of push the technology forward.
It's pretty incredible. And you're going to be able to keep your position at the university while you're simultaneously helping with this institute?
Yes. Schmidt Sciences has created a role for me through the University of Kentucky, where in a way that's similar to working for the National Science Foundation, I can act as a program director for a percentage of my time, and still maintain my affiliation with the University of Kentucky. So I'm actually really grateful to Schmidt Sciences for arranging it that way, rather than me having to leave my post, because I love being a professor at the University of Kentucky. And I'm also grateful to my dean and the leadership here for allowing me to accept that, because they don't have to, right? But I think it's good for all of us.
No, it's great for the university, on behalf of the university and Lexington and Kentucky in general. We're all very proud of the work that you've done over all these years, and that you've been able to, stay here at the university and do this kind of work, which is obviously now, it's world renowned. So I'm proud of you. I'm glad, and thanks for coming on the podcast and sharing some of the story. Evan, we're going to have to figure out how interspersed in here, we're going to have to at least show maybe a few little clips or something so people can understand what we're talking about. They've got a lot of media that they produced and is out there. And then in the show notes and stuff, we'll put links out to some of these videos. And it's pretty cool. And didn't you tell me that there's like a documentary crew or something kind of following you around, or have been?
There's going to be a feature film. They're almost wrapping up production. They'll go to post-production. The target, I believe, is going to be film festivals in early 2026.
Okay.
And it'll be a full feature around this work, the members of my team, and the related members who have all, helped in a collaborative way to break through. Yeah. I think it'll be really, really fun. Executive produced by Scott Free, which is Ridley Scott's documentary film company.
Okay.
Nice.
Very cool. Yeah, I started out by saying it's one of the, I think it's like, it's hard to think of something that's like a sexier, kind of cool combination of, and I think you nailed it. It is the human part of it that really makes it so interesting. And it's this, now all of a sudden this technology's come to bear, in this way to reveal and kind of open up all this new possibility. So incredibly cool. I know you've been sharing with me some other projects and stuff. There's just going to be a lot of applications for this, and I think it's going to open up a whole new world of possibilities. So congrats on that, Frank.
Thank you.
Evan, any last comments?
No, I'm good. This was a fascinating conversation, and it builds on what Christy shared the last time. And I feel like it's just an incredible story, and it's still unfolding, right? Like this isn't over. and you're at this really cool moment in time where it's like we can share this with a wider audience, and they understand what's going on because the technology has been democratized to a certain extent where, okay, like, oh, I've heard of this, I've used this, and maybe not the exact tools you're talking about. Obviously, you're talking about super high-tech 8-micron, level stuff that you're doing. But at the same time, it's like, oh, the bridge has already been built of understanding of what's going on here. And I feel like what a great time to be able to present it and get the story out there, because there are so many people who would love to hear about this. And be way beyond this podcast, obviously, 60 Minutes and all those other second-rate channels that exist out there.
This is going to get more views than your 60 Minutes story, Brent.
I hope so. Somebody asked me, how long will it be before one of those books is actually on the bookshelf, edited? And I don't know, but I know it'll be a lot shorter than if we hadn't done the Vesuvius Challenge, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because if I had just hacked away on my own, and then, one papyrologist takes what we did and they hack away on their own, right?
Mm-hmm.
But instead we've built a community and an expectation that we can go faster, and I love that,
Yeah.
Well, I think I was kind of giving you a hard time about, but I am serious. I'd love to get you this next October for our Confluence event here in Lexington to spend a little bit of time with this group. I think one, you get a kick out of some of the people that come in for this. I know they'd love having this conversation with you. Yeah, I mean, that's to me, that's what doing these events is all about. You kind of get this cross-pollination of ideas and fresh thoughts. Like you said, this wouldn't have come about if you didn't take the opportunity to go out to Nat's weekend and, engage in some new way that you hadn't in the past. But we'll keep everybody up to date. And I know what I was going to say, Brent. I think one of the reasons that you weren't able to participate last year, because you bring people to Lexington too from that world and that community, and sometimes we end up kind of overlapping and just kind of not being able to work it out. But hopefully this year we'll be able to have you.
Well, I heard that last year, the party was amazing. I don't know what had me out of town, but the year before that, Randall, it was First Letters.
Yeah.
We had all of the Italian papyrologists in town, and the Friday of your Confluence event was the Friday we had a press conference to announce Purple.
Yeah.
So I had a good reason for missing.
Very cool. Well, cool. Well, thanks for giving us this time coming on the podcast. I've been looking forward to this. I think this is going to end up being the final episode of our season. We kind of break these up into seasons, but really appreciate you coming on and sharing this. And we'll get plenty of links and fodder for people to go dig in as deep as they want to go on this project. So,
well, that's cool. I mean, maybe you can have me back next season, because we're going to have a big scanning session in a few weeks.
Yeah, I had sent you when I was out at Autodesk University. There's some friends of mine, Paul Aubin and Rob Sinclair, who we've had on the episode. I sent you some pics because they've been involved in some scanning projects that they volunteer. They go over to Italy and have been scanning, using some scanning technologies to scan some of the antiquities over there. So for sure, there's some people that come in for our Confluence event that you'd love to probably have some conversations with about this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. All right. Thanks for joining us, Brent.
All right. Thanks so much.